When your father has a 1969 Hemi GTX in the garage, you're kind of preordained to love cars from the get-go. You see, this is the elephant, the big dog, the one that so many other cars wanted to be when they grew up. But back in the 1970s, not everyone realized that the Hemi cars from the Chrysler Corporation were all that special. Doug Stark, however, was not everyone, and at 17 years young, he ponied up $2,500 in cash and bought himself a unicorn.
'76, I was looking for another car. I had a '69 Roadrunner that was mildly built, and it was quick enough, but not quick enough. And I saw that car out in the parking lot, had a for sale sign on it, and I kind of liked the unique things, so I thought the Hemi was way different, and I'll buy the Hemi car.
Are somewhat mythical beasts, right? And when you hear the words 426 Hemi, you automatically perk up and you go, oh, that's just badass. 426 cubic inches, underrated at 425 horsepower, made more around 500. And these were the big guns of the day.
I think you had to be a real Chrysler fan to know what the Hemis meant. We always heard about them. Of course, you watched drag racing, NASCAR, and the Hemis were dominant, especially when they went to the wing cars. From the day I actually decided to buy the Hemi car, I knew it was something unique, potentially collectible. I don't know why. Even at 17, I kind of thought that was in the back of my mind. If I could keep this, a long time, it might potentially become collectible, because they only made like 10,000 total street Hemis.
Dodge, Chrysler, Plymouth, back in the 60s, they had the best bodies in the business. I don't care what other car, American muscle car you brought up, Chryslers, the Dodges, Plymouth, they were the shit. I mean, you've got this Coke bottle design, the twin air vents on the hood, these beautiful sculpted taillights and a grille, just a pretty car. And one of my favorite parts, pillarless windows. You open these things, it's just open air, and they're beautiful. God, I love these cars. And they're just big, brash, in-your-face two-door coupes. Nobody makes anything like that anymore. Now, if you look at this car, you're going to say, well, the paint is a little ratty, and it's got a couple of dings in here, and it's got a couple of dents in there. And that's because he's owned this car since 1976. And you know what he's never done to it? He's never restored it. And the reason is, doesn't need to.
Some shows get people who say, why don't you paint it, why don't you restore it? Well, you don't understand the car. You don't understand it's an original car, it's only original once. And it has a lot of chips and dents and scratches, but that's okay.
We've seen so many over-restored cars that are, beautiful in their own right, but there's something about a car that's original. And the more you change, well, the more it changes. It loses that feel and that kind of rawness about it.
Every family has something that bonds them together, and in the case of the Starks, it just happens to be automobiles. What started with a $2,500 Hemi GTX has morphed into a story of automotive passion and preservation.
While they were growing up, the car was in the garage. They always kind of knew what it was. And of course, we had to play with Hot Wheels, all of us.
I think it wasn't until, we kind of really got into the age where we started looking at cars, and I started, wanting to drive and things like that I started seeing it as something special. And then when we started restoring the car, I helped Dad pull the engine, do all that type of stuff with it. I think at that point is when my interest really took hold.
When I was a kid, for the longest time, I thought the full name of the car was Hemi GTX. I thought that was like one word, like that's what it was. So it probably wasn't until I was a teenager that I really figured out what it was and that it was worth something and special. I always thought it was really cool. I just knew it was big, it was green, and when it was still running, when I was 5 to 7 years old, I remember going for rides in it and just how loud it was, and it would shake everything, and the whole car shook. And then it sat for a good 20 years. And I remember getting excited when he was putting it back together.
As you may or may not have guessed by now, this is a Mopar family. Sure, there are other hobbies that families can partake in together, but in my opinion, one that puts out around 1,500 horsepower collectively is not a bad place to start.
I think all of us have an inclination to fix things, you know, rather than pay somebody to work on them.
Cars are always a big part of my dad's life, and we didn't take cars to mechanics, and that's rubbed off on me. You know, I don't take things to mechanics.
To be honest, I didn't know a lot of mechanical stuff about cars and things like that when we started, so getting to learn about that stuff and learn how all the things work was really informative, and it was fun to do.
Yeah, somewhere along the line, we just kind of fell into it, and then since Chrysler products are the things I know well, might as well stick with them. Those are the easiest ones for me to work on since that's what I know.
Not that I wouldn't own another car, but growing up in a Mopar family definitely kind of pushed me in that direction, of course. They're unique. The stylings are unique on them. If I am going to purchase one for myself, it's probably another Mopar.
It's a fun experience to have all three of us, and especially to be able to drive them like all in a row, park them next to each other, let people know that we're all related and that we all share this hobby.
One of the best things that happened was a couple of years ago, we did a Christmas card, and we had all three of us standing with the cars, and they were all backed into the driveway here.
The Christmas card photo was something my mom really wanted for 2, maybe 3 years. And every time she'd get ready to take that picture, one of the cars would be laid up. And it finally happened that they were all three running, they were all three sorted out, and we could get them all in the driveway and take the picture at one time.
That was really cool.
Doug Jr. rolls a 1967 Charger with a fuel-injected 440, while Joe keeps watch over his fully restored 1966 Hemi Charger. At first glance, you may think that these Chargers are very similar, but look closer and you'll find that the cars, along with the philosophies of their owners, are very different indeed.
I think one of the interesting things about all three of these cars is that you've got three very different takes on how to do this. You know, my dad's car calls it a day 2 car. It's the kind of the performance mod somebody would have done in that day. My brother's car, the 66 Charger, is a complete restoration. I mean, it looks like it came off the factory floor, down to the special tires and the skinny wheels.
When then it came time to build his own Charger, Doug Jr. took a little different route, and his whole philosophy was, what am I learning from this car?
It's a learning experience for me, and it's about developing skills. Sometimes I feel it's a little self-indulgent to spend the whole day in the garage, but on the other hand, I get to learn things that I get to apply around the house. You know, it's all related. Even though one's a car, one's working on a house, you learn things about measuring and cutting, you know, how to look forward and see the obstacles that are going to come up and plan for those things rather than just diving in and flailing around and making everything worse.
Joe is meticulous about stuff. You could tell by the way he restored that car, but he lends to the more artistic side of it.
I found that I like to paint things. I like painting car pieces, and I've ended up buying a couple of spray guns and an airbrush, and if I get into the car, I kind of want to do the paint job myself.
And then you've got Doug Sr. that hasn't touched this car in 40 years. Doug calls this a day 2 car, which is an expression that I never heard.
I call it a day 2 car because, you know, you bought them off from the factory, steel wheels, dog dish hubcaps, relatively small exhaust, crappy tires. So the next day you go out, if you had the money, you know, you put headers on it, you put rims and tires on it, you might put some gear in it, you know, might even put a cam, you change the distributor, put a performance ignition in it, and that's pretty much what's done to it.
What's it like to really kind of drive this car? Well, the GTXs, as you know, are B-body, and I have 2 B-bodies, and I love Mopar B-bodies. They ride beautifully, they handle pretty decently. You gotta remember, B-body Mopars and most Mopars back in the day were set up with a torsion bar systems, no coilovers. And people say, well, you can't make these cars handle. And that's a fallacy. You actually can, and you can do it quite well. But this car is basically stock. He hasn't upgraded the torsion bars from stock. He's upgraded the shocks to like KYB units. He's upgraded, you know, the tires to a BFG radial TA and some nice Kragers. It looks exactly like it would have in '76. Of course, you saw hot rods, muscle cars, and street rods like this, and this was kind of like the uniform back then. If you look at the interior of the GTX, right, what do you see? Well, you see basic. I've got a very, very clean dash I've got a sweeping speedometer. I don't even have, it doesn't even say, according to this, I'm doing 5 miles an hour. When you get up to 13, you could just be like, what is it, 13? I don't know what you're talking about all this. The gauges that you do have, you've got your speedo, your alternator, your gas gauge, and your temperature gauge, and you've got a tiny little tack, which is almost like an afterthought in the side of the gauge, because they were like, oh, maybe we should put a tack so you don't blow up your motor. Any Hemi car back in the day was not equipped with AC. You could not get AC. And it's a really simple reason for that. There was nowhere to put it. I mean, the AC compressors back in the 1960s and the late 60s, they look like big V twin engines out of like a Harley Davidson. They've got loads of room, plenty of room for myself at that. The back seats have plenty of room. You know, Doug's wife was saying that she used to drive this car with car seats in the back when the boys were little. The center console is great. There's no armrest. In fact, your elbow kind of hits the rear of the console. However, the shifter is exactly where it should be. You reach out and you palm this thing, it just feels right. So some designer sat in the car and went like this, and then went like this, and then marked it down and said, this is exactly where the steering wheel should be, and this is exactly where the shifter should be. And goddamn if they didn't nail it. Can you drive these cars every day, and would you want to? Well, I mean, obviously back in the 60s, they were driven every day. In the 70s, they were driven every day. I wouldn't want to drive one now every day, because we do get somewhat spoiled with modern conveniences like air conditioning that works, cars that can run in 120-degree weather and not overheat.
I probably wouldn't drive an older car as my everyday car. Not saying that I wouldn't mind going around and driving it every day, but I wouldn't like drive it to work.
I try to drive it as much as I can. I drive it around town all the time. No problem with that on the weekend. I would like to get to the point where I can drive it, you know, to work every day. There's always one last hurdle to kind of making it more of a daily driver. You can't just put it together, break it in and say, okay, well, it runs and drives. Something's going to go wrong, so it takes time.
Well, the new cars, it's great. If you want to fly down to LA, it's a lot nicer to be in a car that's quiet, has air conditioning, soaks up the bumps, nice stereo and all that stuff, but you begin to be removed from the driving experience.
These cars, you have to pay attention with you drive. You have to have your wits about you. And you actually have to know how to drive.
And it's not like a modern car where you just get in and turn the key and go. Sometimes got to feather the throttle a little bit before it'll quite start, and sometimes it gets hot and cranks a little slow. It takes a minute to start. More than that, it's a very different experience driving that car than driving a modern car.
Everybody really should learn how to drive an older car first, because that, at least that way, they know how to control cars and how to actually drive. A lot of people nowadays can't drive worth anything.
You can't let yourself get distracted when you're driving one of these cars. You know, it wanders a little bit on the road. Doesn't matter how well it's aligned, it wanders a little bit. Got disc brakes on mine, it still doesn't stop entirely straight. Steering wheel does not return all the way to center on its own. There's about this much free play in the steering wheel before it actually does anything.
You know, there's no traction control, there's no electronic suspension or anything. It has manual steering. You hop into that after you've driven a little car that, you know, the steering, you turn half a turn and you go around a corner. No, that's almost 2 turns sometimes. Plus there's the visual, the seat of the pants feel, the sound, especially with the headers and the turbo mufflers on it. It's got a nice rumble. It's just, I feel like you participate in the driving experience more driving the old cars. If I didn't buy it when I did, there's no way in hell I could buy it now. I could not afford it. Really, I'm very lucky that it has all just fell into place for us.
Even back then, he knew it was special. He knew that a Hemi GTX was something that, you know what, maybe I shouldn't sell. I should probably hang on to this thing. And 40 years later, he still has it. He still gets in it. He still put his foot down, feel that elephant under the hood accelerate. He said they're only original once, and he plans to just keep it going, keep driving it, and keep enjoying it. And man, sometimes restoration is great, but original, I think it might still be king.